All right, so we're going to start a new unit today, and a lot of this vocabulary you actually should have seen in 5th grade. So we're starting this unit, Measures of Center, with kind of reviewing some of the vocabulary and defining what these terms mean. So measures of center are actually types of averages. Measures of center is just kind of a fancy math term for saying averages. So they're types of averages for a data set. Now, data set, a lot of times we think of numbers, but data doesn't have to be numerical. If you're doing a science experiment and some of the data you're taking might involve color or shapes, some of the observations that you're making. So data doesn't always have to mean numbers. A lot of times it does, but it's basically the types of averages for a data set is like the information that you're given, values. Examples of measures of center include mean, median, and mode. So the 3 M's, all of these are already written down below on your paper, so you may have guessed that already. There's other vocabulary on this paper that are not measures of center, but they're words that you will see or need to understand within this unit. So mean, median, and mode, the 3 M's, are your measures of center. One word you're going to need to know here to help distinguish when one of the measures of center is better to use than the other is outliers. Outliers, look at the kind of the formatting of the word there. Look at the word out, and you see liars. Outliers are numbers that stand out, or they lie out from the rest of the group. So numbers that stand out from the other numbers. So it's like which one doesn't belong. It's either way bigger than the rest or it's way smaller. Something just doesn't seem right about it. It's different from the rest. Okay, so looking at definition of mean. Now, there's a couple ways to look at mean. I'm actually going to skip this first bullet point because that's kind of the new stuff. I'm going to go down to the second one here, and that's a definition you've probably already seen before. So the mean is how you've probably heard of it, a numerical average. So that's, again, the next blank of a data set, and is found by, if you're finding the average, like your test average, quiz average, the class average on something, it's found by adding the numbers in the data together and dividing the sum by the number of data pieces. So you add up and divide. Okay, if you're averaging 2 numbers, you would add them together and divide by 2. But again, if it's a class average on, say, a test or a quiz, then you would add up everybody's test scores or quiz scores and then divide by the number of people that took the test or quiz. So now I'm going to go back up to the first bullet point. What we're going to be looking at mean this year is not just this definition of adding and dividing, but looking at mean as the point on a number line where the data distribution is balanced. So we're looking at our number line and thinking of it as kind of a balanced scale, and the mean is the point where all the values would be balanced. It's a little bit different way of looking at things. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into that as we go through our unit. Now, mean, one of the things I said you might be asked to do is to identify when each measure of center is the best representation. So what that means is you can find mean, median, or mode, right, for different situations. You might not be able to find mode if none of the numbers repeat, but most cases you can find all 3. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily the best representation. So mean works best for a set of numbers with no outliers. So remember, outliers are the numbers that are way bigger or way smaller than the rest. For example, if you're looking at your test average, right, and you have a 92, an 83, an 83, a 100, a 92, and then you have a really bad day. Maybe you had a hard time understanding a unit because you were absent a bunch, and you didn't get much sleep the night before because your baby sister was crying all night. You come in, you take a test, and you get a 17. So with our 12-question test, that means you got 2 right. That 17 is going to pull down your test average, okay? So that 17 is your outlier. It stands out from your other test scores. So it would be nice, we don't do it this way in school, but it would be nice if if we used a different measure of center than mean, because when you add up all the values, including that 17, and divide by the number of tests you've taken, it's going to pull it down. So mean works best if there's no outliers, because that will kind of skew your average, basically. What you would want to use, if you had outliers, is median. So again, looking at a definition of median to start out with, it is the middle value of a data set in ranked order, meaning from least to greatest. So you can't just pick the middle number from a bunch of numbers that are given to you. You have to order them first. Least to greatest and pick the middle number. Now, if there's an even number of numbers, so meaning there's not a middle number, you would average the 2 middle numbers, meaning you would add the 2 middle numbers together and divide by 2. Now, median works best with sets of numbers with outliers. So again, if you had that test score of a 17 that pulled down all your other A's and B's that you got, if you use median, it would be less affected. If you use median as a way of finding the average instead of the mean, it would be less affected by that 17. And we'll see examples of that throughout this unit. But mean, you want to use if there's no outliers, median if there are outliers. And our last measure of center here is mode. So mode is a piece of data that occurs most frequently. And you can remember mode most because they both start with not just M, because all measures of center start with M, but MO. MO and mode, MO and most, they're both 4 letters, so they look kind of similar. They kind of go together. So mode is a piece of data that occurs most frequently. So continuing on with mode here on the next page of your notes, mode works best with sets of data without numbers, which again sounds weird, but you can have data without numbers. So maybe it's a yes or no response, maybe it's a survey of your favorite color, maybe you're voting for class president, whatever it might be. Your response, or whoever is taking part in that survey, their response isn't going to be a number. If it's what's your favorite color, it might be, green or pink or blue or purple, yellow. Those do not have numerical value. I cannot even find the mean or the median if I wanted to. I can't add up red plus blue plus purple plus green and divide by 3. Okay, I can't total anything. Also, I couldn't list them in order from least to greatest because, again, there's no numerical value, so I can't put them in any type of a ranked order and pick the middle one. So if there's no numbers in your data set, your only choice is to find the mode. So, of course, it's the best representation of the data because it's the only representation of the average that you can use. It's the best measure of center. It's the only representation. It's the only measure of center. The other time is if with data sets that have repeating numbers. Now, you have to be careful about this because a lot of times students want to immediately pick mode as the best measure of center just because it has a mode, just because it has a number that shows up twice, okay? When I say that it's for data sets that have repeating numbers, I mean most of the numbers are that number. Most means more than half. So as a good rule of thumb, if more than half of the numbers are the same number, then mode might be the best representation of that whole data set. But if it's less than half, don't look at mode. Look at mean or median, depending on whether or not there's an outlier. So to kind of recap here, if I have my three measures of center, I have mean, median, and mode. What I generally look for is I want to check for median or mode first, okay? Mode, if there's no numbers, or if there's obviously one number that takes up most of the space, most of the numbers, most of the data, okay? If it's not mode, that leaves mean or median, okay? Median is what I would choose if there's an outlier. If there's no outlier, then it's kind of like by default, slide this up so you can see it, then I would go with mean. So look for mode if there's no numbers, or if one number really is most of the numbers, more than half the numbers are the same. Okay, if it's not mode, then check for median. Okay, look for an outlier. If there's no outliers, then by default it's mean. So mean isn't really something you want to look for right away. You want to try the other two first, and if it's not either of them, then it's mean. So for mean, you tend to see your numbers kind of close together because there's no outliers. Again, you wouldn't see one number like repeated a whole bunch of times. So mean, you just want to check for median or mode first. If it's not that, then it's mean. And the last blank we're going to fill in at this point is range. So range, again, is not a measure of center. If a test question asks you what's the best measure of center and range is an answer choice, don't pick it. Cross it out. It's not a measure of center. It's a vocab word you need to know for this unit, but it is not a measure of center. You might use range to help you with a line plot or numbering a number line to find mean. But range is the difference, which means you're subtracting. It's the difference between the biggest and smallest numbers in a data set. So you take the biggest number, subtract the smallest number, and that's your range. So again, we're going to use line plots and number lines for this next section with mean as a balance point. And you might have to, find the range so you know how to number that number line to create your line plot. But the range is not a measure of center.